Find someone that's studying business. Let's say you want something like more like an advisor or a mentor or a future board member, like maybe that's a professor or a faculty member. And the thing is in college, people are really eager for connection like that. So whether it's a professor that they see a younger version of themselves, or someone who's willing to take more of a risky path and like maybe going into academia, I just think there's so many opportunities for people in college to use the fact that it's kind of a closed environment to build relationships that can pay huge dividends in their entrepreneur career.
Yeah, that's dope. Being a part of the university that you were part of as well, like I think it's one of the universities where there's this network,
Hmm.
right, where you can kind of do business in
Yeah.
Texas, for example. You don't have to necessarily say, "Hey, let me boil the ocean. Let me do the whole entire world. Like, let me start in this one place
Yep.
where there's tons of value to
Yeah, I mean,
unlock."
it's like look, Facebook. Obviously, Mark Zuckerberg started that at a Harvard. When I started Locler years later, it was on the backs of a belief that Austin was enough. Like I like in Atlanta, they have these shirts and the hats and stuff, and says Atlanta only needs Atlanta. And
Hmm.
from like a music industry standpoint, you can see that like I mean, there's a whole ecosystem out of hip hop that Atlanta has just kind of lifted itself to the stage that's in with organized noise, with Outkast and So Def with Jermaine
Hmm.
Dupri and all that. And from there, in Austin's the same way with local businesses. And I saw that in college. Companies like Dell Computers started at the University of Texas campus. Tito's Vodka started in Austin. It's now the biggest vodka company in the world. Whole Foods started in Austin. So there's very much like a buy and support local ethos that was there. And so by the time I started my first businesses, my purview was like, hey, if I can make this work in Austin, then that may be enough.
Hmm. So you mentioned Localer. That is the previous business. You spent a long time building that out into what it was. Can you talk a little bit about you know, you starting that, some of the learnings from running that for the amount of time that you did, what, 7, 8 years maybe? And then where that company is now, because we know that you're focusing on TenYour.
Yeah. So I mentioned that, TenYour is number 5 company for me. And before Locler and before TenYour, I had 3 other businesses. One I still have, which is a social media kind of executive communications company working with clients. Like my first client actually was FedEx back in 2009. Now I have a few CEOs as clients of different businesses, from startups that have raised a seed round up to $150 million organizations, where I'm mostly just kind of sharing thought leadership and in CEO support. My second business actually was a sneaker boutique in downtown Austin that I had for a few years doing brick and mortar retail. From that experience, I closed the sneaker shop, and then I created and ran the first ever fashion and style segment of South by Southwest Festival. But with each of those few businesses, with the sneaker stores in particular and in the South by Southwest event, I only did those for a couple of 2 or 3 years. And those experiences were really rich. But I decided after that, I was like, man, I really want to, my next company, I want it to be something that I feel like I can do for at least 7 years. So when Locler came about, I remember meeting with my first investor, and I committed to him. I told him I was going to do this for at least 7 years through hell or high water. And there was a lot of hell and high water. I ended up actually, because of the pandemic, ended up tacking on more years. So I found it Locler in December of 2012 and ran it for over 10 years. And actually, just last week, a week ago today, actually, I just managed to facilitate a transaction in which I bought out in essence, did a debt buyout of my investors. And now I'm the sole owner of Locler. And so I still continue to run the business, but unfortunately, after the pandemic, it just wasn't going to have the kind of venture sized acquisition outcomes that we wanted. And so it just made more sense for me to take over as a sole owner, making it more of a lifestyle business where it generates revenue, but nothing that's venture sized at the time. So that's still going in the background. But that experience doing something for 10, 11 years through good times, bad times, through the pandemic. I mean, I think I've experienced everything you can possibly experience as an entrepreneur: fundraising, team building, having to fire people, landing partnerships with big companies like JetBlue and Nike and Lyft, Match.com, scaling from just Austin users to users in 200 cities around the world, language translation, different mediums from apps to website to print, like we did it all. So all that experience is getting poured into anything I do in the future. And immediately it's getting poured into in a tenure. I felt like my next venture, it would take me maybe a year and a half to get where it took me 10 years to get Locler. And here I am month 10 into tenure. And we've already eclipsed where Locler was in year 10.
Yeah, I love to see like you're able to apply all those learnings, whether good or bad, right? And there's an acceleration that happens. I'm curious, like all the things you went through as a founder, like you mentioned, the highs, the lows. You're hiring, you're firing, you're doing all those things that come with the job. Like, how do you maintain your mental health through all these situations?
That's a great question. Honestly, maybe the most important question that founders should be asked that are often not asked. I say this from experience because I faced some very, very, very dark and challenging times from a mental health standpoint. In mostly in as after the pandemic, like 2022 was a very, very tough. The end of 2022 was very brutal. I spent that, post pandemic, I spent probably 6 months just pivoting the business to survive the pandemic. And I'll say this, we had our best quarter ever in Q4 of 2019. We were on the verge of having our best quarter ever Q1 of 2020. And it was that year, 2020 was lining up to be a breakthrough year for Locler. And this is after 7+ years grinding on this thing. And then the pandemic hits. And we basically lose 95% of our business like that. And basically we spent the next 6 months doing a hard turn on the business, and then really just grinding for a couple of years, working towards trying to land some type of exit and having really fruitful acquisition conversations with some of the biggest tech and finance and credit card companies you can think of in the world. And there were some great conversations that, it felt like we were on the doorstep of finally getting that breakthrough, maybe getting that exit that was going to be attractive to us as myself as a founder, my team, and then our investors. And at the end of 22, they just didn't happen. And it was like the season where all those big tech layoffs started happening and
Mhm.
the interest rates going up. And it just was perfect storm of not a good moment for us. And, and it was, and I can, I'll say openly, for the first time in my life, there was a couple of months, the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, where I was at an all-time low. I was near suicidal. And I know that there are some founders who've shared that they've had those experiences, but not many. And now I'm super open about it. I put so much of myself into the business and also into trying to pursue this outcome and feeling the weight of all. I have this cap table with all these investors, people counting on me,
Mhm.
and it was just heavy. And my lead investor, I should also mention, was just a phenomenal man. And he passed away several years before due to a unexpected heart attack. Obviously, I guess they're all unexpected. And I just felt like such a high level of responsibility to honor his investment and trust in me and all my investors. And it was a lot of pressure that I was putting on myself. And I think that led to like being, after those acquisition talks ended. I mean, I remember I woke up in a San Francisco hotel room at 4 a.m. And honestly, I was contemplating ending my life. And it was, I felt like, and that was a week after getting all these